What's up guys, this is the Honest Outlaw here, and I just wanted to do a quick video of some tips that I've heard recently. Not just recently, but maybe over my entire shooting career. I've heard a lot of tips that seem to be repeated over and over and over again at many gun clubs, matches, and just from my friends that I hear that seem to be so synonymous with shooting, but are actually not really correct. Or maybe they have the right idea, but they're not fully explained on what they're talking about, so they're misused, misrepresented, or misinterpreted. So I wanted to really go over 5 tips that I hear all the time that are actually bullshit. Before I do that, I want to mention my Patreon supporters. Thank you guys very much. Because of you, the channel keeps moving, and because of that, we do a monthly giveaway and we do Patreon exclusive content. You want to become a supporter, go down to the description. There's a link in there. All you got to do is click and sign up. And I want to mention a local homeless shelter that could really use your support. First thing I want to talk about is the 80-20 grip or the 70-30 grip. I've heard this a ton. I actually just recently heard this from one of my buddies who took a concealed carry class. And I want to go over what that means. I want to go over kind of why it was a thing, and then I want to go over why you shouldn't use it and why it's kind of out of date. So first things first, this is how we used to shoot the Weaver stance. Okay? Now this was designed, in my personal opinion, probably around smaller caliber revolvers and things like that just didn't have that much kick, or they weren't trying to shoot real fast. So a lot of people say this stance is inefficient, and they're probably right. But the reality is, for a single shot or for a couple multiple shots or for a low recoil string of shots, it's not so bad. Nowadays what we use is more of an isosceles stance with some bent elbows. This is a real good grip. So when the 80-20 grip was really popular, it was really focusing kind of a push-pull 80-20 type scenario. Whereas if you are standing in a triangular stance, putting all of the right pressure, the right grip pressure, shoulder pressure, thumb pressure, all that stuff on your grip, you really shouldn't concern yourself with percentages of grip.
Okay.
You ready?
Yep.
If you want to grip the gun, you should grip as hard as you can with both hands. 100% with both hands. You want to grip the gun hard enough to hold it under recoil, because you're not gripping it to ride the recoil back. You want to resist the recoil. You want to shoot as fast as possible. Give a little demo here. All right, now I'm at 20 yards or so, and all those were on target. The reason why I'm saying that is because you want to grip as hard as possible without having your hand shake, because that's what you don't want. And you also don't want to lose dexterity in that trigger finger, because shooting is about speed and accuracy combined. So I get all that speed and all that recoil control from gripping the gun, and that also helps negate some of the trigger issues that I'm going to have. If you're holding the gun on target as hard as you can, even if you bobble the trigger a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. However, you're going to want to have enough dexterity in your finger to worm your trigger finger correctly or pull it back correctly, however you want to do it, in order to get the accuracy you want. So take that 70-30, take that 80-20, throw it out the window, and just squeeze it as hard as you can while still maintaining a reasonable degree of accuracy depending on the distance. And it's up to you how hard you want to squeeze it, how soft you want to squeeze it, how fast you want to shoot, or how accurate you want to be. But the reality is that 80-20 thing is just confusing, and it's just bullshit. A good stance is the most important when it comes to shooting. That is also kind of bullshit. So the idea of a stance gets confusing when you talk about people, right? So what they do when you set up a new shooter is you're like feet shoulder width apart. Tactical lean forward, which we'll get into later. Present the gun, hold under recoil, pull the trigger. The problem with this is, what if somebody's shooting back at you? What if you have to move to engage a different target? What if you have to do any of the normal things a human being does? You are not going to be able to do it like this, right? So the importance of stance, really, in my opinion, is in the upper body, okay? So I wanna tighten that core. I wanna bring those shoulders up a little bit. I wanna have my elbows bent a little bit as shock absorbers. I wanna squeeze my elbows up just a little bit to increase the pressure in my hands. I want to squeeze down to the bottom of my hands and inside of my hands and everything to hold that grip into place. However, that doesn't have a lot to do with my lower body. And the reason why that's not so important, the athletic stance, although it is kind of important if you can get into it. And if you're going to be moving and shooting, you may not have time to get into a perfect stance. So the point I'm trying to make is that you don't need to have a stance, and you honestly shouldn't, because you're gonna rely on that. And then when I see people at the range, they just sit there and they stand perfectly still because they're used to shooting at an outdoor range and don't realize that if you're in an actual shooting situation, you're gonna be moving all over the place. Or if you're in a USPSA match, you're gonna be ducking behind cover or all kinds of weird stuff you're gonna be doing, and you're not gonna have time to assess the lower body. So stance is extremely important, but it has very little to do with your foot placement. All right, for the third tip, we got one glove on and one glove off because it's cold out here and I wanna, I don't know, emulate Michael Jackson, I guess. But I wanna talk about finger placement on the trigger. Now this is another one I hear all the time. So many trainers, many very good trainers and many very good champions will tell you to use the pad of your finger on the trigger, all right? And that's a good idea because it has the most nerve endings, it's the best feel, and you can feel great while you're pulling it. That's a good idea if you have the right hand size to do that. I've heard some other people say that use the crook of your finger, which is predominantly what I actually do, believe it or not. That's not, and I'm not advocating for that for everybody, and we'll get into that in a second. But a lot of people use this. And then you have some people, especially like Pat McNamara, who will use their finger all the way in the trigger as far as they can go. And they will go like this. Also people like Travis Haley will use the pad of their finger, but they will worm the trigger finger in like this. Now what do all those people have in common? They're all phenomenal shooters. All of them are. So that leads me to believe that it doesn't really matter where you put your finger. And it doesn't. Like if you watch any Rob Latham videos or anything like that, the only thing that matters is the trigger being pulled to the rear without disrupting the sight picture. Without moving the gun off target. That's all you're looking for. You're just looking to pull the trigger in whichever way works the best for you and your finger length, your hand type, your hand size. All you're doing, pulling the trigger to the rear without disrupting the sight picture. There's a couple of standbys you can use, but eventually you're gonna have to figure out what's right for you. And if you have small little stubby hands, the tip of your finger might work the best. Average sized hands, pad of your finger, bigger fingers, the crook of your finger. And guess what? If you're always pushing off to the left all the time and you're more of a bullseye shooter and you really want to avoid that altogether and not worry about speed shooting so much, stick your finger all the way in the trigger. It really depends on what type of shooting that you're doing and what hand size you have. So if something works really well for you and somebody else has another alternative, feel free to try it, vet it, put it under a timer, whatever you want to do. But at the end of the day, it's really about what's right for you. The next thing I want to talk about is squeezing the trigger until it surprises you. This is bullshit. I don't like this. I really don't like the idea behind that. I don't like the mentality that gives people when you teach them that. The point of that is to get used to the trigger press and kind of get an idea of when it's going to break, but pull it so slowly and so effectively that you're really worrying about the trigger going back to the rear without worrying so much about when the gun's going to go off. So it's a good teaching tool for very new shooters. However, that's not something I would recommend doing the rest of your life. There's so many situations in which you would use a handgun where that just simply does not apply. If you are in a real life shooting, you're gonna want that gun to go off when the fuck you want it to go off. You know, you really don't want to have to sit there, pull the trigger slow, wait for it to go off, and then hope you still have a second shot. That's ridiculous. You know, you get used to pulling the trigger to the rear over and over and over again as fast as you can. And knowing your gun, controlling your gun. You are in control of this gun. This gun doesn't go off until you tell it to. With your finger, with your thumb, with your big toe, however you shoot. The point is that you want the gun to go off when you want. If you're in a hostage type situation, like if you're a police officer, military guy, and you have to take a shot when you absolutely have that opening, whether you got a guy that's peeking behind a wall or peeking out of a window, or whether you're just shooting at a deer that's coming a little bit behind a tree, or maybe, like I said, you're using a revolver, you're handgun shooting, whatever the situation may be. I don't remember a whole lot of real life situations in my life where I had to use a firearm, where I was like, okay, I have all the time in the world. Let's slow down, let's relax, let's take that nice easy shot. You have to get used to shooting under stress, and you have to get used to shooting quickly. And the way that you do that successfully is to know when the trigger is gonna break. And the way that you do that and control that really well is to just be the master of your own trigger finger and know how to pull that trigger correctly without disrupting that sight picture. And finally, I wanted to discuss the tactical lean. And the tactical lean is essentially this. You're preparing for recoil that is never going to happen. So you see people come out and they want to get into a super aggressive stance, and I've got no problem with an aggressive stance, don't get me wrong. I've got no problem with putting a little bit of weight forward. If you really talk about stance, you really want to talk about your feet, and I did kind of dismiss this earlier, but you do want to be on the balls of your feet a little bit to allow for some movement, to allow to put your weight a little bit forward. And you want to lean slightly forward, but still keeping your head up on a swivel so you can see trouble that's happening. You're also looking at the gun through your glasses. That's a big thing on matches. There's a lot of guys will be looking towards the top of their glasses, and their glasses will actually get in the way of their target acquisition. So if your head's up a little bit, you can see right through the middle of your glasses, and you have perfect situational awareness. At the same time, that's just a natural position for your body to be in, so you won't have to overthink things. So if you're worried about the targets, you're worried about the next shot you're going to make, you don't want to be worried about having to get in position, stop, get in your lane, and lean way forward like this. And that's not an over exaggeration. I've seen people on the internet that are way worse than that way crazy lean. I don't know what you're leaning for. It's a very ineffective way to move and shoot at the same time, and it's a really ineffective way of just shooting. It doesn't actually reduce any recoil. For example, Jerry Michalek, who might be the greatest shooter alive, and he's my personal idol, he's got a great video on why you want to stand straight up and shoot. I won't get into the entire details, but just the point of that guy, Rob Latham, Travis Haley, John Lovell, all those guys stand up when they shoot. And there's many reasons behind that, but the main one is to be able to move under any situation, be able to swivel easily. So if I'm tactical leaning like this, right, and I have to hit a target way over there, I have to shuffle my feet. If I'm up like this, all I have to do is twist my hips. So it's way easier to move and way easier to transition targets. And you also don't look like a total dumb shit.
Yep.
All right, so now to show that trigger control, we're just gonna shoot here at 50 yards, and then we'll shoot again at 90 yards. And just show you, if you use the right technique, you can hit targets at distance pretty easily with a handgun. Warming up the old hands.
With the old junk?
Well, it's the warmest part of my body currently.